This morning, we have a very special vehicle. This is Steve Bell's 1969 Camaro. Now, what makes this vehicle special is that it is completely period correct, and it has the full DZ302 kit on it. Now, back in 68, 69, this was a $2,000 kit, but there were not very many of them ordered at the dealer. And now we have the ability to tune these extremely well, and Steve's having a few problems with it. So what we're going to do today is run through some of the stumbling, some of the idle, and some of the way it smells rich and doesn't start good. He has no confidence in it, overheats, and we're going to make this run the way it should. All right, what I'm looking at first, which I look at the same on every single vehicle that comes in, is the tension that is on the accelerator pump. This one isn't terrible, but I'm still going to back it off because there's no space at all for the engine to wobble. As soon as the engine wobbles, this does this, and if you look inside the carburetor right now, with this doing this, just me touching it, it's gonna go plip, 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 and just flood it full of fuel every time it touches. So what we're gonna do is back this off a tiny bit, just till this gets a bit of slack. It doesn't have to have a lot, but it's gotta have enough so that it doesn't sit here and idle and jump, because this accelerator pump is just a little diaphragm down here. Its job is when the throttle blades turn, there's 14.7 atmosphere here, 14.7 here. When you turn the throttle blade, you have nothing. So there's nothing to draw the fuel in. So you squirt a tiny bit of fuel in there, which gets the engine going. So this is basically just to get the engine to accelerate. Almost every vehicle that I see of this era, when they come in, we have the PVC hooked up like this. It goes directly into the intake. If there's another whole system set up, it's okay. But the way we've looked at this, there's just an open spot over there. So this is directly connected to the intake. Being directly connected to the intake, there's a hole over there. So that means you're going to lose all vacuum and all performance of the carburetor at the low end. It's not going to idle properly. It's not going to do anything correctly because you're counting on this to do everything. And this is a very, very, very strong vacuum source that's just going to open that PVC valve and then suck air from that side. And that creates a vacuum leak, and it doesn't run right. There's a very quick and simple way to fix it, but we're going to go through that. Okay, you can tell that the era of this carburetor is a little bit older. In the 70s and 80s, they put an extra vacuum port here, and what they would do is they would use what they called ported vacuum at that point for the distributor. This one still has the non-emission ported vacuum on it, which is better. And every time they come in with them and they're hooked up to the wrong one, because it's easy and that's what they tell them to do, we take it off that, we plug that one up here, and we put it on this one here. This one's hooked up to the right spot. When Steve came in, I was listening to the motor, and it's definitely got a misfire too. It's got like a like, so it skips once in a while. I'm not sure if it's skipping because of the ignition or because of a dead plug or just something else that's happening with it. So one of the ways you can check that is with a heat gun. Just go to each cylinder and see if they're all roughly at the same temperature, or at least they're hot. They should be hot. Like we should be seeing 300, 400, 500 degrees. This thing will even turn off if it goes over 600. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, now we've had a chance to run the car, make a couple of baseline passes. Just at cruise and at idle, it's rich. We see the same thing when we do a pass. When we talk about AFR, we're talking about air-fuel ratio. So just to explain that quickly, that's what we're measuring coming out of the tailpipe is pounds of air in a ratio of 2:1 pound of fuel. What we'd like to see is 1280 under wide open throttle. And what we'd like to see around cruise is somewhere in the 13s. So that just kind of cruising along at 13 and then doesn't smell, it drives in and out of the garage nicely, and it starts and idles good. Right now, it's rich at cruise, and then it has a lean section, and then it goes rich on top. And it's done that consistently. If we look through at the screen, we'll see that it's not bad at the bottom, and then it goes lean right in the middle. So anything from 3,000 to 4,200, it goes really lean. Both times it made very similar power at exactly the same point, but the second time we revved it up a bit more, and we already know this is the DZ302 package. It has more compression, has more cam, so it's not going to want to make peak power at 2,000 RPM or 2,500 or even 3,000. It's going to want to make it higher. So in this case, 231 horsepower at 5,600 RPM, because that's as high as we revved it. Then the second time around, we rev it to 5,900. Guess what? It made 248 at 5,900 RPM. So the higher you rev it, the more horsepower it makes. Customer's not looking for that. He's not looking to go out and run down the track and run wide open. He's looking for a nice driving car. So that's what we're going to do for him. But the bonus is going to be that we're going to make it run nice and get a bit more power. All right, so we know that the choke has a bend in the flap, and we're going to take it out and straighten it. And there's a couple other things we're going to look at. I'm going to simply look where the low speeds are, and I'm going to look where the float is. I'm also going to look where the accelerator pump comes in. And after that, we're going to make a couple passes. I don't want to make too many changes at once, so that's what we're going to do first, is fix the float, fix the flap, and then go through and make a couple more changes. Oh, it's working great. Yeah, because it's all the way up. You can hear it. It's all the way up. It's just this piece here. It's bent over, so when the air hits it, it'll deflect, and won't actually get onto here, right? Which it doesn't allow it to. Like a carburetor works off of jetting, and those little venturis take air in and speed it up. Right. Well, the air is being deflected away, so then it has to go to the back one. So that's why you get that, the lean section where it doesn't actually pull the air through the venturi, right? So rather than doing a bunch of jetting first, the air hasn't even got a chance to do its job to pull through the venturi.
So when you get it up, you see a deflection in the plate?
Oh yeah, look at it. Look at how bent it is.
Is that supposed to be straight?
It's supposed to be straight. And
serious?
Yeah, they're not supposed to. Well, some of them have a curve in them because it's supposed to fit the back side of here so that it can completely shut out. But you can't have that much of a bend in there. Wow. And I see them come in every day and they have a slight taper to them. But what happens is it gets, somebody opens it up and they lean on it and it gets, because it'll just bend and bend and bend over time. We just take when you're straightening these out, again, if this was a really cold climate, you could leave a little bit more of a curve in this than I have. And if you look at it from my angle, you'll see there's a bit of a curve on both ends. There's a bit of curve left. But the idea is that it keeps some of that cold air from coming in when it's really, you're never going to drive this car in the cold. So when I straighten them, I put them on the anvil and I tap them until I hear the sound change from a dull thud to a sharp ping. As soon as it changes to a sharp ping, I know I've got it straightened out enough that's going to run good. So this is the low speeds. So the low speeds only work on this car up to about 2,700 RPM, 2,800 RPM, they shut off. Because you no longer have enough vacuum to use them, it gets into velocity. So what we're doing is just checking where they are. Simple as that. We want to make sure they're both the same. And where are they? So half, one, half, ooh, almost two. That one that's as far out as you can possibly go. That's why it won't run when it's cold, and it's just so rich. So we're going to take it back where it was. Half, one, half, and it was right at the flats again. And that's at the maximum you can even get it out.
So why would you take it back there? Just to see?
Don't want to see where it is. I want to keep baselining it and make one change at a time.
Okay.
So the next thing I'm going to do now is grab some rags, check the float. All right, what we're going to do is check the float. A lot of people out there have a lot of different ideas about what the float does. But basically what you want to do on a carburetor like this, sometimes they'll have a window, sometimes they'll have a little plug, sometimes they'll have a little piece of plastic sticking out the side. This one you actually pull it out, and all I want to do is just jiggle the carb bit and just see that it just barely dribbles out. If it's running right out, the float's a bit too high, and I'll explain why we care whether that's high or low. And if it's not running out at all, we can't even bounce the car, we can't see the fuel, then we need to raise it a little bit. Very simple adjustment to make, but a lot of guys just get in there and do things kind of blind, and you have to have a reason for everything that you do. We're just going to check it first. So we'll pull the plug out. I'm going to look in and visually see if we see some fuel that either dribbles out or we have to bounce the car a bit and it dribbles out. It already started to come out, so I have a feeling that we're right there. Yeah, I couldn't set that better myself. It's right where you can see it, and if you hit it, it just puddles out of the hole. Okay, so the back one I can just see, and if I wiggle the car, I can just see it start wobbling, so we're good again. That's the lock nut. This here is your actual lock nut. This is your adjuster. So whenever you see my notes, you're gonna see that I adjusted it 2 squares. So if we start with our front square and we turn it to here and we come around with a new square, that'll be 1 square. Going in, we'll push it down, which will give you less fuel. Coming back out, we'll lift it up, which will give you more fuel. For performance, if you get to a point where your low speed and your mid speed and your high speed are not transitioning correctly, that's when you adjust the float. If you come off your low speed and you got this big gap where it won't transition correctly to the mid speed, and you can see that on your AFR, then you will adjust the float. Otherwise, you don't touch the float, you just leave it where it is. See how I can't touch now, even if it goes up and down, I can't touch on there. It's got a bit of play in it, so I can't possibly push down on it as the engine's running. So I want to go a bit too far with it so that we can come back. Because if you go too far in this, you'll create a stumble when he stomps on it.
Well, yeah, you won't get the
Right?
gas.
Because you won't get the gas you need. But that, even when it's jiggling, it can't jiggle on this and jump fuel down into there.
Makes sense.
Which is not what we want. When you actually purposely do it, right?
Yep.
Yep. Identical to what it did on the engine now, because the choke's not on. It leaned it out everywhere, so you got air going through it. Now we need to put the fuel in it. So the top end, when you get to the very top, it's still good. But the bottom end, there's no fuel there on the jets. So you can't adjust the carburetor, because this whole section here, that's all your low speed front jet. They shouldn't have run it that way on the engine dyno. That's just too lean. Remember I said it's way too lean? And if you ran it here for a long time, that's why Wally let off the first time, because it was so lean it didn't want to go. And all we did was make that one little change. So it's going to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff. So still during the cruise, and remember the 1190s when you saw it? Now does this not look identical to what you saw on the engine dyno?
Yeah, it is.
You could lay it over and it's almost exactly the same. Yeah, because you got that 11 and then goes into 12 and then it comes up. This is your squirter. And then all of a sudden it just goes, whoop, I'm out of fuel.
Yeah.
So we just got to put some fuel into the front jet. I don't think we need to touch the back jet yet. Because when it does finally get up on the very top, look what happens.
Comes down to
It starts to come in 1290, 12, where I want to see it in the 1280s, right?
yeah.
And that's when you make your power. Alrighty, what we did first, I want to make step-by-step changes. So the first thing we did was take the choke flap out because I suspected it was deflecting the air and we weren't getting all the air into the carburetor. The choke flap is bent, just like Steve says, from the factory, but it's bent, it's made for winter time. It's made so that you always have enough, deflection, you get a bit of a rich mixture, so it's always gonna run good. But in the summertime, in a car like this, with an engine that much power, with that much high speed, it doesn't like that, it just deflects the air. We weren't getting the air through, so we weren't getting the proper fueling. Now we get the air through, it immediately leaned out the engine. So we went from 12.8 AFR, and 1190 right into 13.6. That's just way too lean. If you were to hold it at 13.6 for a period of time, 6, 7, 8 seconds, 10 times in a row, you burn a hole in the piston. That's not what we're looking for. So we can pull the whole bowl off because right here, there's a jet plate. So that plate we want to take out and check, see what jets are there. And then what we want to do is check and see what power valves there, what jets are there. The power valve really doesn't matter because it's correct.
Yeah.
But I do want to make sure that the power valve doesn't have 2 gaskets on it because that'll screw up the front vacuum circuit. And I also want to make sure that the power valve's been put back in straight. And then what number it is, and then we'll check for the jets. And we're going to add some jet to the front. In other words, we're going to make the hole bigger. When we say adding jet, we're just making a hole bigger in thousandths of an inch. Okay. Been hard lined, so it's kind of it's challenging to get off. But at least the gasket's in good shape. Ooh, there's no whistle in it, so this will be fun. So on a new vehicle, there's a whistle, and it plunks into here. It's a piece of plastic, sticks out into here, and it takes atmosphere from here and feeds it to the bowl. On these old ones, you have this. So when you go to stick it back in, you have to gently hold it in and then push this again. It's fun. So now, add jet, 6.5.
Which is what you thought.
Yep. My guess is it's somewhere in the 60s or maybe a 70, but we'll see. All right, we put the bowl back on the front of the carburetor. We went from a 74 to a 78, and what we need to remember is this is very small cubic inches. So when you have small cubic inches, the airspeed is going to be slow through a 780. 780 is not a huge carburetor, but it's big enough, and it allows this engine to rev. But at low speed, what happens is the 780 is going to have slow speed because you got a big hole and a small engine pulling air through it, so the airspeed is going to be pretty slow. So we put bigger jet in the front. Even though 74 sounds rich, because the airspeed's so slow, it can't pick it up quick enough. So we put more in there just to make it easier for it to pull it out. And now the low speed should pick up, the mid speed should pick up, and we'll see where air fuel goes to. All we're trying to do is get that air fuel somewhere in the 12. All right, here we go. Steve Bell brought us his 1969 Camaro today. It was running rough. Like when he drove it in, it really didn't drive nicely. Was unable to actually even get it to come up on it. They had to restart it several times. It was bouncing and going. We wanted to address each one of those issues, and that's what we did. So we started it by doing some baselines. If we look on the screen, we can see where the beginning torque and horsepower were, 240 foot-pounds, 231 horsepower. The main thing we wanted to address, which is what we always address here, is drivability and of course air-fuel ratio, and then finally we want to make sure that the car starts. So that's what we've done. The very first thing we did was make a couple of adjustments. They were small adjustments to the choke. We checked everything. We went over all where everything is set, and then we started with the actual tune portion. So on the first set of passes when the car came in, we were looking at air-fuel ratio, and it kind of mimicked the previous dyno sheet that he had brought to us. The previous dyno sheet showed that it was okay, and then it got really, really lean, and we were into the 13, even up into 14.1 or 14.22 air-fuel ratio. And so it's just not enough fuel to make anything drivable. Every time you step on it, it's going to do all kinds of funny things, including hesitate and jerk and go. We made a few adjustments, we made a few passes, and once we straightened out the choke and we were able to get it so that it was using all the air that it could, it went right back to being very, very lean. On the very top end though, we had enough fuel. So if you look at the way the carburetor works, it goes from low speed, it goes into the front of the carburetor, which is your main jets, and then it uses both the rear and the front main jets, both the front and the back. So we started with the front main jets because the top end looked really good. We added 4 main jets, so we went from a 74 to a 78. It came right to life. We made a couple more of adjustments just so that it came through. So I adjusted the low speeds from 2 out all the way down to 1 1/4 out. And now our cruising AFR went from where it was down in the 11s and 12s up into the 1280 to the low 13 range, where you want it. Gets rid of the smell, makes it drive nicer, and hey, you don't want to use all that fuel unless you have to. So after we had done that, we made a couple more passes. We had everything set up. We put the carburetor back on and we want to see where it is. We went from having a very wavy line here to a really nice solid line. And here's where we ended up. The big deal here is not the fact that it made more power. It's the drivability. It's the fact that the car starts and runs and does all that kind of thing. That's great. But when we look at this curve, it just comes on, it's just nice and drivable. And we took the time afterwards to go through the gears and really load it up in 4th gear at a low RPM to see if it's going to buck or chuck. It didn't. And load it up in 3rd, see if the response is good, shift through the gears, see if that's good, shut it off again when it's hot, start it up, shut it off, start it up. make sure that everything's good. So the starting issues, the low speed issues, the medium, and it's all a series of very small changes that we made. So the AFR in the end ends up being a really nice, smooth AFR all the way through. So the air fuel ratio starts in the 12s, goes to the 1280s, sits in the 12s the entire way from top to bottom. And if you look at the curve, that's what you get. You get the air fuel ratio coming up and just staying there all the way through, and the car just runs the way it's supposed to. We did end up adjusting the timing. We tried adding a bit of timing. We tried taking a bit of timing away. We messed with the distributor cap a little bit of a different distributor cap than what we're used to. But once we got it back on, get everything settled up, we did take a tiny bit of timing out because the car, when it got warm, didn't want to start. It was rolling over really slow. Now it just goes boom, starts up every time, rolls twice and starts. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we've done.
Thank you. I wasn't sure what to expect coming here, and I was a little bit concerned with leaving my car in the hands of somebody else, because I'm typically a backyard kind of mechanic. But what you've done and what you've created and what the car runs like now is just absolutely amazing. I'm so pleased and so happy, and I can't wait to get it out and get to a cruise night and maybe give it a little shot of gas.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
We're super happy to have you here. Thank you.
Appreciate
it. The reason that you want to get your vehicle to a dyno to do this kind of tuning is because we can do it precisely. We can tell you exactly 100 over 100 what's happening with your AFR. So your air fuel ratio is the basis for all tuning. We want to make sure that the air fuel ratio is correct. When the car came in, it was lean, and when we are done now, we've made as many changes as we want to make, but now we can see all the way through it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's within a point or two of being perfect. It doesn't jump up into the 13.2, 13.6 AFR range. It stays in the 12s, and it's where we want it to be. For a vehicle of this vintage, nobody ever took this much time to get the fueling correct. If you're doing it at home or your mechanics do it, just do it by smell, by taste, by what he hears. Oh, that sounds good. Or reading the spark plug. The spark plug only shows you one spot. This shows you all the way through. This is why you want to have it done here.